"Why did my daddy write your name on the back of my necklace?" Amara asked, placing the tiny gold locket in the center of Nathaniel Brooks's boardroom table. The room went silent so fast even the rain against the glass seemed to stop. Nathaniel stared at the initials inside, his face losing all its polished calm. Across from him, Graham Whitlock's gold ring tapped once against his coffee cup. Then Amara looked at the billionaire and whispered, "Was I supposed to find you?" And it all started 3 days earlier, with a school nurse's phone, a locked office door, and a little girl who was tired of pretending she wasn't scared. Amara Lewis knew exactly which floorboard in her grandmother's apartment squeaked and which one stayed quiet. That morning, she stepped only on the quiet ones while tying her left sneaker with one hand and holding a paper bag lunch with the other. Inside the bag were crackers, half an apple, and a folded note from Grandma Evelyn that said, "Be brave, baby, but be careful." Amara read it twice, then tucked it into her coat pocket like it was something warmer than cloth. Outside, the South Chicago wind pushed hard against the windows, rattling the thin glass. Evelyn stood by the stove, pretending the steam from the kettle was why her eyes looked wet. She was supposed to be resting, but rent notices did not rest, medicine bottles did not refill themselves, and little girls still needed breakfast before school. "You call me if anything feels wrong," Evelyn said. Amara nodded, though something had already felt wrong for 2 days. At South Haven Elementary, the halls smelled like floor wax and pencil shavings. Children hurried past in bright backpacks, their voices bouncing off the tile, but Amara slowed near the front doors. Across the street, beside a leafless maple tree, stood the woman in the cream coat. Same coat, same blue notebook, same soft smile that never reached her eyes. Amara did not wave. She only touched the locket under her shirt and walked inside. By lunch, the woman was gone, but the feeling stayed. It sat beside Amara in math. It followed her to the water fountain. It stood behind her when Mrs. Collins asked everyone to write about their families, and Amara left the word father blank so long the pencil made a dent in the paper. The first shift came after recess, when Amara saw the woman again through the cafeteria window, not looking at the playground, not looking at the teachers, but looking straight at her necklace. Amara's fingers closed around it. The woman opened the blue notebook and wrote something down. That was when Amara stopped feeling watched and started feeling chosen. She asked to go to the nurse, saying her stomach felt funny. It was not a lie exactly. Fear had a way of becoming real inside a child's body. The nurse stepped out to find a thermometer, and Amara saw the office phone on the desk. Beside it sat an old photograph she had taken from Grandma Evelyn's sewing box that morning without asking. On the back, in faded blue ink, was a number and a name. Nathaniel Brooks. Amara did not know he owned hospitals. She did not know his office sat 32 floors above Michigan Avenue, with men in dark suits waiting for him to decide where millions of dollars would go. She only knew her father's initials were inside her locket, and this man's name had been hidden with them. The second shift came when Nathaniel answered. His voice was cold, busy, almost gone before it arrived. "This is Brooks." Amara gripped the receiver with both hands. "Sir," she whispered, watching the hallway through the cracked door. "There's a woman at my school who keeps watching me." A pause. Papers stopped moving somewhere far away. "Who is this?" he asked. "My name is Amara Lewis." The silence changed. She did not understand how, but it did. Then she said the one thing that made the richest man in the room sit down slowly, as if the floor had moved beneath him. "And she smiles whenever somebody says my dad's name." Nathaniel Brooks did not speak for several seconds after the call ended. The men around the boardroom table shifted quietly in their leather chairs, unsure whether the meeting had paused or collapsed entirely. Rain slid down the glass walls behind him in silver streaks while the skyline of Chicago blurred into gray. Nathaniel slowly turned the old photograph over again, tracing the faded ink with his thumb like he already knew the handwriting but did not want to admit it. Then, without explaining himself, he stood, buttoned his coat, and walked out of the room while someone behind him was still discussing a $40 million expansion deal. 40 minutes later, a black SUV rolled up outside South Haven Elementary, just as students were pouring onto the sidewalks. Children laughed, buses hissed, crossing guards blew whistles into the cold afternoon air. Nathaniel stepped out and immediately spotted Amara sitting alone on the front steps, carefully peeling the label off an empty juice bottle with tiny, patient fingers. She looked up at him like she had expected him to come. Not hoped, expected. "You came fast," she said softly. Nathaniel stopped a few feet away. "You sounded scared." Amara shrugged, though her eyes drifted toward the street behind him. "Grandma says scared people notice things other people miss." That landed harder than he expected. Nathaniel followed her gaze across the street, but the woman in the cream coat was nowhere to be seen. Only a city bus pulling away from the curb and a man selling roasted peanuts beside a newspaper stand. For a moment, he almost felt ridiculous standing there in a cashmere coat because of a child's phone call. Then Amara quietly said, "She was there a second ago." The rhythm shifted again when the school doors opened behind them and Principal Harris stepped outside with a smile that appeared too quickly. "Mr. Brooks," he said, extending a hand. "We weren't expecting a visit." Nathaniel shook it once. "Apparently I was." Principal Harris chuckled politely, but the sound felt dry. "Children can be imaginative." Amara lowered her eyes at that, rubbing her thumb against the edge of her necklace beneath her sweater. Nathaniel noticed the movement immediately. So did Principal Harris. His smile flickered for half a second before returning. Tiny, almost invisible, but Amara saw it too. She leaned closer to Nathaniel and whispered, "Adults look at my necklace before they look at me." The words settled between them heavier than the winter air. Before Nathaniel could respond, the front office secretary hurried outside holding a clipboard. "Sir," she said nervously, "someone asked for Amara's dismissal records earlier this week." Principal Harris turned sharply toward her. Too sharply. "That's enough, Denise." Silence snapped tight around the group. Denise's face drained pale as she realized she had spoken out loud. Nathaniel's expression changed then, not dramatically, but enough. The kind of change powerful men rarely allow others to see. He looked at Harris differently now. Not as an educator, as someone hiding something. Across the street, a city bus pulled away from the curb again, revealing the woman in the cream coat standing perfectly still beside the bare maple tree, her blue notebook open in her hands. And this time, instead of looking at Amara, she was looking directly at Nathaniel. The strange thing was not that the woman in the cream coat kept watching them. It was that she never once looked surprised to see Nathaniel Brooks standing beside Amara. Most people recognized him instantly. They stared too long, reached for their phones, whispered his name under their breath. But the woman across the street simply turned one page in her blue notebook and kept writing, calm as snowfall. Nathaniel noticed it a second too late. Amara noticed immediately. "She already knew your face," she whispered. The buses pulled away one by one, leaving gusts of diesel fumes twisting through the cold air. Principal Harris excused himself stiffly and disappeared back inside the building, though not before glancing once more at Amara's necklace. Nathaniel caught the look this time. He crouched slightly beside Amara. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. 3 days, she said. Then she paused. "No, maybe longer." Nathaniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Amara looked down at her shoes, dragging one toe gently against the sidewalk salt. "She started smiling at me 3 days ago, but I think she's been looking before that." The rhythm shifted quietly there. Nathaniel studied the woman again, but when he started toward the curb, Amara touched his sleeve. Not hard, just enough to stop him. "Don't go fast," she said softly. "Scared people run when other people move too fast." The sentence felt too old for an 8-year-old child. Nathaniel slowed without meaning to. Across the street, the woman finally closed the notebook. She tucked it under her arm and walked away beside the row of parked cars, disappearing briefly behind a delivery truck. Nathaniel crossed anyway. Tires hissed through puddles. Somewhere overhead, the elevated train rattled across steel tracks. But by the time he reached the sidewalk, the woman was gone. Only a paper coffee cup sat near the curb beside the maple tree. Nathaniel almost ignored it. Amara did not. "Wait," she said. She hurried over and pointed toward the side of the cup where a name had been written in black marker. Not a coffee order. A last name. Lewis. Nathaniel stared at it. The same last name Amara carried. The same last name from the photograph in his pocket. Wind rolled sharply between the buildings, fluttering the edge of the receipt still tucked beneath the cup. Nathaniel bent and picked it up. The purchase time read 2:13 p.m. yesterday. Exactly the same time Amara's school file had been accessed overnight. His chest tightened before his mind caught up. Someone had been connecting pieces long before he arrived. "Mr. Brooks?" Amara asked carefully. He looked at her. "Did my dad know you?" Nathaniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. He saw Daniel at 19, laughing beside Lake Michigan with snow in his hair. Then another memory followed too quickly after it. His son shouting for the first and only time in his life before slamming the front door of the Brooks estate 10 years earlier. Nathaniel swallowed hard. "I don't know yet," he admitted quietly. Amara nodded like she understood uncertainty better than most adults did. Then her eyes drifted toward the school windows. Her expression changed instantly. Small, sharp, alarmed. "She's inside now," Amara whispered. Nathaniel turned toward the building just as the second-floor curtain moved. "You walk too fast," Amara said as Nathaniel pushed through the front doors of South Haven Elementary. He slowed automatically, almost annoyed that he had listened. Children brushed past them in noisy clusters while fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Nathaniel was used to people hurrying to keep up with him, not asking him to slow down. "If somebody's hiding," Amara added quietly, adjusting the strap of her faded backpack, "they can hear angry shoes." Nathaniel glanced down at the polished leather dress shoes striking sharply against the tile floor. For the first time all afternoon, he noticed how loud they sounded. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and cafeteria pizza. Somewhere nearby, a teacher laughed too loudly at something small, the kind of laugh adults used when they were nervous. Nathaniel followed Amara toward the front office while his phone vibrated again and again inside his coat pocket. He ignored every call. That alone felt strange enough to unsettle him. Inside the office, Denise sat rigidly at her desk, typing much too hard for such a quiet room. Principal Harris stood near the filing cabinets pretending to organize attendance forms, though his eyes flicked repeatedly toward Nathaniel and Amara. The curtain upstairs had stopped moving, but the feeling of being watched had not. "Mr. Brooks," Harris said smoothly, "there's really no reason to alarm the child further." Amara looked up before Nathaniel could answer. "I'm already alarmed," she said. The honesty of it landed heavily in the room. Harris forced another smile, but it came slower this time. Nathaniel noticed a thin layer of sweat near the man's temple despite the cold building. Then the rhythm shifted. Denise accidentally dropped a folder while reaching beneath her desk. Papers slid across the floor in messy white streaks. One page stopped near Amara's sneakers. She bent instinctively to help gather them. Nathaniel crouched beside her a second later. Most of the papers were ordinary attendance sheets, field trip forms, lunch account balances. But one page was different. No school logo, no district header, just a list of student names beside handwritten times. Amara's name sat near the top. Next to it, in blue ink, someone had written, "Picked up a loan yesterday." Nathaniel's hand froze over the page for half a breath before Denise snatched it away too quickly. "Old paperwork," she blurted. "Too fast. Too rehearsed." Amara looked at Nathaniel, and he could tell she had noticed the same thing he had. Denise was frightened, but not of him. Harris stepped forward immediately. "I think that's enough excitement for one day." The sentence sounded gentle. The tone underneath it did not. Nathaniel stood slowly, the room tightening around him in invisible ways he could suddenly feel. He had spent 25 years building companies by noticing pressure before other people did. And now pressure was everywhere. In Denise's shaking fingers. In Harris's jaw. In the silence hanging over a little girl's name on an unofficial list. Then came the second shift. As Nathaniel reached for Amara's backpack to help her, She quietly pulled away and whispered, "Don't touch the zipper." He paused. "Why?" Amara swallowed once, eyes fixed on the bag. "Because this morning it was closed," she said softly. "And now somebody already looked inside." Amara unzipped the backpack anyway. Nathaniel reached for her wrist too late as she slowly pulled out a folded sheet of white paper neither of them had seen before. The office suddenly felt smaller. Denise stopped typing. Principal Harris took one sharp step forward before catching himself. Amara unfolded the paper carefully on the desk between them. It was a printed photograph from the school security cameras. A grainy image of Amara standing outside her apartment building 2 nights earlier. Someone had circled her in red ink. Beneath the picture, typed in plain black letters, were the words, "Confirm before contact." The silence that followed did not feel accidental anymore. Nathaniel's expression hardened in a way Amara had not seen before, colder now, but focused. Not the coldness of disinterest. The coldness of a man realizing something private had already become organized. "Where did this come from?" he asked quietly. No one answered. Denise looked like she might cry. Harris recovered first. "This has gone far enough," he snapped, moving toward the desk. Amara reacted before Nathaniel did. She grabbed the paper against her chest and stepped backward so quickly her chair tipped over behind her with a loud crack against the tile floor. The noise echoed through the office. Somewhere down the hallway, children laughed, completely unaware the air inside this room had changed forever. Nathaniel moved between Amara and Harris automatically. The motion surprised even him. "Nobody touches that paper," he said. Calm voice, dangerous eyes. Harris raised both hands immediately, but his breathing had turned shallow. "You're misunderstanding this," he insisted. "Schools document safety concerns all the time." Nathaniel looked down at the red circle around an 8-year-old girl. "That's not concern," he said. "That's surveillance." The rhythm shifted again when Amara noticed something tiny near the bottom corner of the page. Not school information. A logo. 3 silver leaves inside a circle. She frowned. "I've seen this before." Nathaniel looked at her sharply. "Where?" Amara hesitated. For a second, genuine fear crossed her face. Not fear for herself. Fear of saying something she was not supposed to know. "Grandma told me never to talk about it with strangers." Harris took another involuntary step forward the instant she mentioned her grandmother. Too fast. Too interested. Nathaniel saw it. So did Amara. She lowered the paper slowly. "Why do grown-ups get scared every time I say her name?" she whispered. Nobody answered. Outside the office windows, snow had started falling lightly across the parking lot, soft flakes spinning beneath the orange streetlights. Then came the near exposure. Denise accidentally spoke before thinking. "Because Evelyn was there that night." She stopped herself violently, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. The entire room froze. Nathaniel turned toward her. "What night?" Denise shook her head immediately. "I didn't mean, I don't know anything." Harris cut in sharply. "Denise, enough." But it was already too late. Amara's eyes moved between them carefully, piecing together emotions adults thought children could not see. Shame, panic, guilt. Nathaniel slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old photograph again, laying it beside the surveillance printout. His thumb stopped over something he had somehow ignored before. The same 3-leaf silver logo was embossed faintly in the corner of the photograph's frame. Amara stared at it, then at him, then back at the picture. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Mr. Brooks, why is your son standing next to my grandma?" The drive away from South Haven Elementary happened in almost complete silence. Snow drifted softly across the windshield while downtown Chicago glowed pale beneath the early evening clouds. Nathaniel sat in the back seat beside Amara instead of across from her, though neither of them mentioned it. The photograph rested in his hands the entire ride, edges worn smooth from years he suddenly wished he could take back. Amara leaned her forehead lightly against the cold window glass, tracing invisible shapes into the fog with one finger. Every few minutes she glanced at the Silverleaf logo in the corner of the photograph as if trying to remember where else she had seen it. Nathaniel noticed but did not interrupt her thoughts. He was afraid of the answers now. The SUV stopped outside Evelyn's apartment building just as the streetlights flickered on. A man pushed shopping carts through dirty snow near the corner grocery store, while somewhere above them a baby cried through thin apartment walls. Nathaniel stepped out first and instinctively reached to open Amara's door. She looked surprised for only a second before climbing out carefully, holding the photograph against her coat so the wind would not take it. Upstairs, the apartment smelled faintly of peppermint tea and laundry soap. Evelyn was asleep in the recliner with a blanket folded across her knees, television light flickering silently across her tired face. Nathaniel stopped in the doorway longer than he meant to. There was something painfully human about the room. A stack of unpaid utility bills beside framed Bible verses. Half-finished knitting yarn draped over the couch arm. A child's math worksheet held to the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Wealth had insulated him from rooms like this for so long, he had almost forgotten how many people built entire lives inside small spaces held together by routine and hope. The rhythm shifted quietly when Amara walked to the kitchen sink and rinsed out an empty soup can before placing it neatly into a plastic recycling bin. Nathaniel watched her for a moment. "You always do that?" he asked softly. She shrugged. "Grandma says people who lose things shouldn't waste things." The sentence stayed with him longer than it should have. Amara climbed onto a kitchen chair and carefully opened the locket again beneath the yellow overhead light. Nathaniel expected jewelry, maybe a folded picture. Instead, she removed a tiny dried flower pressed flat between two pieces of wax paper. "My dad gave it to Grandma before he left," she said. "She keeps saying she can't remember what kind it is." Nathaniel stared at the flower. Small white petals. Faded blue center. Forget-me-not. Daniel used to leave them on his mother's piano bench as a boy after arguments nobody apologized for properly. Nathaniel looked away before Amara could notice the change in his face. Outside, snow tapped softly against the kitchen window. The apartment felt quieter now, but not safe. Never fully safe. Then came the second shift. Amara slid off the chair and walked toward the hallway closet. "Grandma hides things when she gets scared," she explained casually. "Not money. Paper things." Nathaniel followed her with slow caution. She knelt beside an old cardboard box near the closet floor and tugged gently at the loose lining beneath it. Her fingers paused suddenly. "That's weird," she whispered. Nathaniel crouched beside her. Beneath the fabric lining sat a narrow envelope sealed with yellowing tape. Across the front, written in faded blue ink, was one sentence that made the room seem colder all at once. "For Nathaniel Brooks only, if they start watching the girl." Nathaniel recognized the handwriting before he fully opened the envelope. His fingers tightened instantly, not from anger but from memory. Daniel used to press too hard with blue ink pens, carving words deep enough to leave marks on the page beneath. The kitchen clock ticked softly while snow drifted past the apartment windows, and for one strange moment Nathaniel looked less like a billionaire and more like a father afraid to read what his son had left behind. Amara stayed very still beside him, hugging, her sweater sleeves over her hands. Nathaniel carefully unfolded the paper inside. It was not a letter. It was a map of Chicago transit lines with several stations circled in blue marker. At the bottom, Daniel had written only one sentence. "If they start asking about the girl, don't trust anyone wearing the silver leaves." Nathaniel's eyes moved immediately toward the faded logo stamped on the old photograph lying nearby. 3 silver leaves inside a circle. The same symbol from the surveillance page. The same symbol from the coffee cup outside the school. A pressure settled heavily into the room then, as if invisible pieces were finally beginning to lock together around them. "Who are they?" Amara whispered. Nathaniel did not answer right away, because for the first time since arriving at South Haven Elementary, he was no longer wondering whether this situation was real. He was wondering how long it had been happening without him. The rhythm shifted sharply when the apartment buzzer suddenly crackled downstairs. All 3 of them froze. Evelyn stirred weakly in the recliner but did not wake fully. The buzzer sounded again, longer this time. Amara looked toward the hallway automatically. Grandma doesn't like visitors after dark, she said quietly. Nathaniel folded the map once and slipped it inside his coat. Then the buzzer stopped. Silence returned too quickly. Not normal silence. Listening silence. Amara crossed the apartment slowly and peeked through the edge of the curtain beside the fire escape. "It's the woman," she whispered. Nathaniel moved beside her at once. Across the street, under the orange glow of a flickering street lamp, stood Celeste Harper in the cream coat. Snow dusted her shoulders. She was not trying to hide. But she was not coming closer either. Then came the first emotional shift neither of them expected. Amara frowned softly. "She looks sad tonight." Nathaniel glanced down at her. "Sad?" Amara nodded. "Scared people look around. Angry people stand stiff. Sad people look tired first." Nathaniel stared at Celeste again, and suddenly the woman seemed less controlled than before. Her shoulders sagged slightly against the cold. One hand gripped the blue notebook tightly enough to wrinkle the cover. Then something else caught Amara's attention. "Wait!" She pointed lower. Beside Celeste's boots sat a paper grocery bag folded carefully against the snowbank. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "What about it?" Amara swallowed. "That's from Mr. Carvey's store. And Grandma owes him money. He only sends groceries when somebody already paid." Nathaniel looked back toward Celeste. The woman lifted her eyes for one brief second and met his gaze directly through the falling snow. Not threatening, not warning, almost pleading. Then headlights swept across the street as a dark sedan rolled slowly around the corner behind her. Celeste's expression changed instantly. Fear this time. Real fear. She stepped backward fast, nearly slipping on the icy curb, and dropped the blue notebook into the snow without seeming to realize it. The sedan did not stop. It only slowed beside her long enough for someone inside to say something Nathaniel could not hear. Amara could. Her small face drained pale as the car disappeared into the dark intersection. Nathaniel crouched beside her immediately. "Amara," he said carefully. "What did they say?" She looked at him with frightened eyes and whispered, "They said your name like they already knew where you were." The apartment lights went out without warning. One sharp click, then darkness swallowed the kitchen completely. Evelyn startled awake in the recliner, while somewhere downstairs a dog began barking through the building hallway. Snow light from the windows painted the apartment in cold blue shadows, and for one suspended second nobody moved. Then Nathaniel heard it. Footsteps outside the apartment door. Slow. Measured. Not passing by. Stopping. Amara reacted before he did. She grabbed the fallen blue notebook from beside the couch where Nathaniel had placed it earlier and pushed it behind the toaster on the kitchen counter. "Don't let them see that," she whispered. The footsteps remained outside. A soft scrape followed, like paper sliding beneath the door. Evelyn sat upright now, confused and breathing harder than before. "Amara?" she called weakly into the dark. Nathaniel crossed the apartment in 2 strides and looked through the peephole. Empty hallway, but the elevator at the far end was still closing. Whoever had been there had left seconds earlier. The rhythm tightened fast after that. Nathaniel unlocked the door carefully and bent down. A white envelope rested against the floorboards. No stamp, no address, just his name typed neatly across the front. Nathaniel Brooks. Snow air drifted into the apartment as he carried it back inside. Amara stood beside him, clutching her sleeves tightly over her hands. "Don't open it yet," she said suddenly. Nathaniel looked at her. "Why?" Her eyes stayed fixed on the envelope. "Because whoever brought it probably wanted to watch you read it." The sentence hit harder than she understood. Nathaniel stepped immediately away from the windows and moved deeper into the kitchen before opening the seal. Inside was a single photograph. Daniel, older than in the picture from Evelyn's closet. Thinner, beard untrimmed, standing outside what looked like a train station beneath flickering lights. Across the bottom someone had written in blue ink, "He tried to come back." Evelyn made a sound Nathaniel had never heard before, something between grief and exhaustion. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Where did you get that? She whispered. Nathaniel turned the photo over slowly. On the back was another message. Some people disappear because they choose to. Others disappear because someone wealthy needed them gone. The room seemed to contract around those words. Then came the second shift. Amara stepped closer to the photograph and frowned. That's not a train station. Nathaniel looked down at her sharply. What? She pointed toward the corner of the image where a green sign hung partially out of frame. That's a hospital shuttle sign. Grandma used to take one when her chest hurt. Nathaniel stared again. She was right. Tiny detail. Easy to miss. But once seen, impossible to ignore. A hospital. His hospital network used the same green transit markers outside Brooks Care properties all over Chicago. A cold realization moved slowly through him then. This was no longer just about Daniel leaving. Someone had controlled where he went afterward. Somewhere beyond the apartment walls, tires hissed across wet pavement. Nathaniel walked carefully to the window and parted the curtain 1 inch. The dark sedan from earlier had returned. Parked across the street with its headlights off. Waiting. Not hiding anymore. Amara saw it too. They know you stayed, she whispered. Then the apartment buzzer crackled violently downstairs again. Longer this time, followed by a man's voice distorted through static. Mr. Brooks, if you want to know what happened to your son, come downstairs alone. That's not how Grandma writes numbers. Amara said it so quietly Nathaniel almost missed it. The apartment buzzer had gone silent again, leaving only the distant hum of traffic and the ticking kitchen clock behind them. Nathaniel was still staring at the message on the photograph when Amara stepped closer and pointed toward the blue ink beneath Daniel's picture. See the sevens? She whispered. Grandma puts little lines through hers. Nathaniel looked again. She was right. The handwriting on the envelope from the closet matched Daniel's old letters exactly. But the message on the back of the photograph did not. Same blue ink, different hand, different pressure. Someone had wanted them to believe Daniel wrote both. The realization shifted something deep inside Nathaniel all at once. Until now, every clue had felt tangled together. Daniel, the school, Celeste, the silver leaf symbol. But this meant somebody was not only hiding the past. Somebody was actively arranging what Nathaniel found and when he found it. The story itself was being managed. The rhythm tightened sharply when Evelyn suddenly spoke from the recliner. Don't go downstairs. Her voice came out thin but firm enough to stop him mid-step. Nathaniel turned toward her. She looked exhausted, but fully awake now, eyes locked on the photograph in his hand. If they wanted you hurt, she said slowly, they wouldn't invite you politely. Snowlight flickered faintly across her face from the apartment window. Nathaniel crouched beside her. Then what do they want? Evelyn looked toward Amara first before answering. To see what? You already know. Silence pressed hard against the room after that. Nathaniel realized something uncomfortable then. The people watching them were uncertain too. Watching Amara had never been only about the girl. It had been about him. About whether he remembered enough to become dangerous. Then came the shift that changed everything. Amara quietly walked toward the kitchen counter and picked up Celeste's blue notebook, the one dropped in the snow outside. I didn't want to touch it before, she admitted softly. But I think she wanted me to now. Nathaniel opened his mouth to stop her, then didn't. Carefully, Amara flipped through the damp pages. Most contained ordinary things. Bus schedules, grocery lists, school times. But near the middle, folded between 2 pages, was a photograph Nathaniel had never seen before. His breath caught instantly. Daniel sat beside a young black woman holding a newborn baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. Naomi, Amara, and standing slightly behind them, smiling tiredly into the camera, was Celeste Harper. Not watching from far away. Not hidden. Family close. Nathaniel stared at the image while the entire shape of the story shifted beneath him. Celeste had not entered their lives 3 days ago. She had been there from the beginning. That's why she looked sad, Amara whispered. Nathaniel looked down at her sharply. What? Amara traced one finger lightly across the edge of the picture. Because she already knew us. The emotional weight of it landed slowly and heavily. All this time Nathaniel had assumed the woman outside the school was hunting the child. But the groceries, the notebook, the distance she kept, the fear in her eyes when the sedan arrived, none of it fit anymore. Someone else had been forcing everyone into silence, and Celeste might have been trying to hold the pieces together before Nathaniel destroyed them again. Then Nathaniel noticed something else in the photograph. Tiny, easy to miss. In the hospital room mirror behind Daniel's reflection stood a man wearing a silver leaf lapel pin, only half his face visible. Watching, Nathaniel's pulse slowed dangerously, because he recognized the pin immediately. Graham. Whitlock had worn the exact same one at the Brookscare Holiday Gala 3 weeks earlier. And downstairs, outside in the dark Chicago snow, a car door quietly opened. Nathaniel opened the apartment door before anyone could stop him. Cold wind rushed instantly into the hallway, carrying the sharp smell of snow and car exhaust from the street below. The dark sedan still waited outside with its headlights off, but Nathaniel no longer hesitated the way he had earlier. Something inside him had shifted the moment he saw Graham Whitlock's silver leaf pin reflected in that hospital mirror. This was no longer a mystery happening around him. It was something built inside his own world. "Lock the door behind me," he told Evelyn quietly. But before he stepped into the hallway, Amara grabbed the sleeve of his coat. "If somebody lies a lot," she whispered carefully, "they start telling the truth when they think you already know it." Nathaniel looked at her for a second longer than expected. Then he nodded once and walked out into the dim apartment corridor alone. The elevator downstairs groaned somewhere through the building shaft. Nathaniel moved slowly instead of rushing, his polished shoes silent now against the worn carpet runner. Halfway down the stairwell, he noticed something strange taped near the mailboxes. A white hospital visitor sticker. Brookscare Medical Center. Today's date. Someone connected to his company had already been inside this building tonight. The realization sharpened his focus instantly. When he reached the front entrance, the sedan door opened before he touched the handle. A man stepped out wearing a dark wool coat and leather gloves. Not security. Not police. Older. Professional. "Mr. Brooks," the man said calmly, "you shouldn't stay here." Nathaniel stopped beneath the flickering lobby light. "Who sent you?" The man's expression barely moved. "People trying to prevent another mistake." The sentence landed harder than a threat would have. Nathaniel studied him carefully. Then his eyes dropped to the man's lapel for only a second. No silver leaf pin. Interesting. The rhythm shifted again when Nathaniel realized the man was deliberately keeping his hands visible, almost as if trying to appear non-threatening. "Did Graham send you?" Nathaniel asked. A pause. Tiny, but real. "Mr. Whitlock believes old situations should remain buried." There it was. Confirmation without confession. Nathaniel stepped closer. "You watched an 8-year-old girl to protect a reputation?" The man looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time. "Sir, you don't understand the full situation." "Then help me understand it." Snow drifted between them in slow white spirals. Traffic hissed along the frozen street nearby. The man reached slowly into his coat pocket, and Nathaniel tensed instinctively. But instead of a weapon, he removed a folded transit receipt. "Your son used this shelter system before he disappeared," the man said quietly. "Someone paid for him to stay hidden." Nathaniel unfolded the paper under the lobby light. Several shelter locations were circled in blue ink. One address stood out immediately. A temporary medical housing center connected to Brookscare's nonprofit division. His nonprofit division. Then came the second shift. Upstairs, Amara had not stayed behind the locked door. She stood silently at the stairwell window overlooking the street, watching the conversation below. Her eyes narrowed suddenly. Something about the sedan bothered her. Not the car itself. The license plate frame. She had seen it before somewhere ordinary, somewhere safe. Then she remembered. Principal Harris's parking spot at school carried the exact same dealership frame with a tiny cracked corner on the left side. Amara's pulse quickened. Down below, The man in gloves glanced briefly toward the apartment windows and stiffened. "Mr. Brooks," he said carefully now. "If the child starts remembering details, this situation becomes dangerous for everyone." Nathaniel's face hardened. "Dangerous for who?" The man looked toward the dark sedan, then back at him. And for the first time all night, genuine fear entered his voice. "You still think Graham Whitlock is the one making decisions?" The thing Amara could not stop staring at was the grocery bag. Not the woman, not the sedan outside, the bag itself, while Nathaniel stood in the apartment lobby holding the transit receipt. Amara quietly pulled the folded grocery receipt from inside the paper bag Celeste had left in the snow earlier. She smoothed it carefully across the kitchen table beneath the dim overhead light. Milk, soup, bread, Evelyn's heart medication, all paid in cash. But one line near the bottom made her pause. "Grandma doesn't shop downtown," she whispered to herself. Evelyn looked up weakly from the recliner. "What is it, baby?" Amara turned the receipt toward the light. The purchase location was printed at the top. Brooks Care Market Pharmacy, downtown campus. Her small forehead tightened immediately. "That's the hospital by the river," she said quietly. "Grandma's never been there." The realization came slowly, but once it arrived, nothing fit the old story anymore. Everyone had assumed Celeste was following Amara from the outside. Watching, tracking, maybe protecting. But if Celeste had been buying Evelyn's medication directly from a Brooks Care location connected to Nathaniel's network, then she had not been circling this family from a distance. She had been moving inside the same system as the people hiding Daniel. The emotional balance shifted sharply. Suddenly Celeste no longer looked like a frightened outsider trying to help from the shadows. She looked dangerously close to the center of everything. The rhythm tightened again when Amara noticed writing faintly pressed into the back of the receipt, almost invisible unless tilted toward the light. She carried it to the stove where the small flame beneath the kettle glowed orange. Indented words slowly appeared. "Room 214, Wednesday. Don't let him sign anything." Amara's eyes widened. Nathaniel stepped back into the apartment at that exact moment, snow dusting the shoulders of his coat. One look at Amara's face and he shut the door immediately behind him. "What happened?" he asked. Instead of answering, Amara handed him the receipt. Nathaniel read the hidden impression once, then again slower. His expression changed completely at the final sentence. "Don't let him sign anything." "That's not about Daniel," he said quietly. "That's current." Evelyn suddenly looked frightened in a way she had been trying hard not to show. "Nathaniel!" He turned toward her sharply. "Who's in room 214? She hesitated too long. That alone was answer enough. Then came the second shift. Amara moved first. She walked quickly to the old cardboard box near the hallway closet and began searching through loose photographs and folded church bulletins without being asked. Nathaniel watched her for half a second before realizing she was looking for patterns, not memories. The same way she noticed shoe sounds, license plate frames, and handwriting. Then she found it. A faded hospital visitor badge tucked inside a Bible. Brooks Care Medical Center. Visitor name: Celeste Harper. Department: Long-Term Recovery Wing. Date issued: 6 months ago. Nathaniel stared at the badge while his pulse slowed dangerously. 6 months. Celeste had not started watching Amara 3 days ago. She had been connected to someone inside Brooks Care all along. Someone hidden in long-term recovery. Someone important enough to justify years of silence, surveillance, and fear. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the floor. "I told Daniel they would never stop looking," she whispered. Nathaniel stepped closer. "Looking for who?" Evelyn opened her mouth to answer just as Nathaniel's phone rang sharply in his coat pocket. Unknown number. Chicago area code. He answered immediately. For several seconds he said nothing at all. Then the color slowly drained from his face. Amara could hear only one sentence from the voice on the other end before the line cut out completely. "Mr. Brooks, your son checked himself into Brooks Care under a false name 9 months ago. Don't tell them where he is." Evelyn's voice cracked sharply through the apartment before Nathaniel could speak again into the phone. The fear in her tone changed the entire room instantly. Nathaniel turned toward her while the unknown caller still waited silently on the line. Outside, tires hissed through slush beneath the apartment windows, and somewhere down the hallway a neighbor's door opened and shut again. Everything suddenly felt too close, too exposed. "Who is this?" Nathaniel demanded into the phone. Static crackled once. Then the man answered. Quietly, "Someone who watched your son disappear twice." The line went dead. Nathaniel stared at the screen for half a breath before redialing immediately. No connection. Beside him, Amara had already moved. She crossed the kitchen quickly and pulled the curtain closed over the window facing the street. Not dramatically, carefully, like she had seen adults hide fear before and learned the shape of it. "The black car's gone," she whispered. "That's worse." Nathaniel looked at her sharply. "Why would that be worse?" Amara swallowed. "Because now they don't need to watch from outside anymore." The sentence settled heavily into the apartment. Then came the first shift. Nathaniel grabbed his coat and keys from the chair. "I'm going to Brooks' care." Evelyn pushed herself upright immediately despite the strain in her breathing. "No. If Daniel checked himself into one of my hospitals, then someone already knows you're looking for him," Evelyn snapped. Her voice trembled after the words left her mouth. Not anger, panic. Nathaniel stopped moving. In the silence that followed, the kettle on the stove began whistling softly. Thin, sharp, almost unbearable. Then Amara noticed something no one else did. The old apartment intercom near the front door had a tiny red light blinking beside the speaker. It had never blinked before. She walked toward it slowly. "Grandma?" she asked carefully. "Does the buzzer always record?" Evelyn's face lost color instantly. Nathaniel crossed the apartment in 2 strides and ripped the plastic cover from the wall. Behind it sat a small recording device wired directly into the intercom system. New hardware, recently installed. The realization hit all 3 of them at once. Every conversation near the front door could have been monitored for days. Maybe longer. Nathaniel's jaw tightened dangerously. Who installed this? Evelyn looked genuinely shaken now. "Maintenance came last week," she whispered. "They said the building security system was being upgraded." The rhythm escalated hard again when someone knocked suddenly at the apartment door. 3 calm knocks. Not aggressive. Somehow worse. Nobody moved. Another knock followed. Then a man's voice came through the wood. "Mrs. Lewis? Building maintenance." Nathaniel extinguished the kitchen light immediately, plunging the apartment into shadow except for the television flicker near Evelyn's chair. Amara reacted before anyone told her to. She snatched Celeste's blue notebook from the counter and slid it beneath the couch cushions just as the doorknob rattled softly once from outside. Nathaniel motioned silently for Evelyn to stay quiet. Another pause. Then the voice returned, calmer this time. "Mrs. Lewis, we just need 5 minutes." Amara's breathing slowed instead of quickened. Nathaniel noticed that too. The child was listening, not panicking. Then she tilted her head slightly toward the door and whispered something that made Nathaniel's blood run cold. "That's not the same voice from downstairs." Silence crashed through the apartment. On the other side of the door, the rattling stopped instantly. Whoever stood outside had heard her. Then came a low mechanical click from the hallway. Nathaniel recognized the sound immediately. Someone was unlocking the apartment from the outside. Nathaniel did not move toward the door after the lock clicked. Instead, he stepped backward into the dark apartment and quietly loosened the cufflinks at his wrists one by one, laying them on the kitchen counter beside the kettle. The tiny metallic sounds felt strangely deliberate in the silence. Outside the apartment, nobody knocked again. Whoever stood there now was listening instead. Nathaniel finally understood something important. Panic was exactly what the people outside expected from him. So he stopped giving it to them. Evelyn watched him carefully from the recliner, breathing shallow beneath the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Amara remained crouched beside the couch where she had hidden Celeste's notebook, her eyes fixed not on the door but on the narrow strip of light beneath it. Then she whispered, "There are 2 pairs of shoes now." Nathaniel looked down immediately. She was right. One pair stood still. The other shifted weight every few seconds. Waiting. Restless. The detail sharpened his thinking at once. One person controlled. One person nervous. That meant hierarchy. Somebody was following orders. Nathaniel crossed quietly to the apartment hallway and glanced toward the back fire escape window. Snow still drifted heavily across the alley behind the building. "We're leaving," he said softly. Evelyn looked startled. "Through the alley?" Nathaniel nodded once. "Whoever's outside expects me to protect the front." The rhythm shifted subtly there. He was no longer reacting to danger. He was beginning to shape it. Amara stood immediately and hurried toward the kitchen without being asked. Nathaniel watched her open a junk drawer and remove 3 identical pharmacy bags folded neatly together. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Making them think we're slower than we are." She quickly stuffed one bag with old newspapers and another with towels, leaving the third empty. Nathaniel stared at her for half a second before understanding. Decoys. Not perfect ones. Child-sized thinking, but smart enough to buy moments. Evelyn almost smiled despite the fear pressing through the room. Then came the first shift. Nathaniel's phone vibrated silently in his coat pocket. Unknown number again. This time no voice spoke when he answered. Only breathing. Then, faintly in the background, hospital sounds. Wheels rolling over tile. A monitor beeping somewhere far away. Nathaniel's expression tightened. "Daniel." Silence. But not empty silence. Listening silence. Then the line disconnected. Amara looked up immediately. That wasn't a stranger. Nathaniel lowered the phone slowly. "How do you know?" "Because strangers say your name first." The sentence settled into him harder than expected. He glanced unconsciously toward the transit receipt still folded inside his coat pocket. Room 214. Wednesday. Don't let him sign anything. Somebody inside Brooks Care wanted contact without being seen. Somebody close enough to Daniel to risk calling. Outside the apartment door, the restless shoes shifted again. A quiet murmur followed, too muffled to understand. Nathaniel made his decision then. "We leave in 60 seconds, he said. Evelyn tried to stand too quickly and nearly lost balance. Nathaniel caught her arm immediately. For one brief second, the billionaire who spent his life negotiating billion-dollar mergers looked terrified of dropping a tired woman in a tiny apartment kitchen. Amara noticed that too. She quietly took Evelyn's hand instead. Then came the second shift. As Nathaniel moved toward the hallway closet for coats, Amara suddenly froze beside the couch cushions. "Wait!" Her voice dropped low. "The notebook." Nathaniel turned sharply. Amara slowly pulled Celeste's blue notebook back into the light. One page near the middle had separated from melted snow and curled slightly open on its own. Across the top of the page, written in hurried blue ink, were 5 words that changed the entire shape of Nathaniel's plan before he even reached the door. "Graham doesn't know Daniel survived." The page inside Celeste's notebook was not handwritten like the others. It was a folded carbon copy torn from an official Brooks Care intake form, the kind Nathaniel had signed thousands of times without ever really seeing. Even in the dim apartment light, he recognized the format immediately. Patient Transfer Authorization. Long-Term Recovery Division. Room 214. The paper trembled slightly between his fingers as he unfolded the bottom half. Patient name, David Morrow. But beneath the typed letters, faint indentations from heavy pen pressure revealed another name underneath. Daniel Brooks. Nathaniel's breathing stopped for one suspended second. Concrete proof. Not rumors. Not guesses. Someone inside Brooks Care had hidden Daniel under a false identity within Nathaniel's own medical network. Snowlight drifted softly across the kitchen walls while the apartment remained silent except for the muffled footsteps outside the door. Even the people in the hallway seemed to sense something had shifted. Evelyn lowered her eyes the instant Nathaniel looked toward her. She did not deny it anymore. She only whispered, "I thought hiding him there was the safest place in the city." The emotional weight landed harder because of how ordinary the sentence sounded. Safe. As if years of lies had become routine survival. Then came the first shift. Amara suddenly moved toward the notebook again. "Wait!" she whispered. Nathaniel almost missed what she saw. A faint yellow stain near the bottom corner of the intake form. Hospital wristband adhesive. She tilted the page carefully toward the kitchen light and another detail surfaced beneath the transfer stamp. Attending authorization G. Whitlock. Nathaniel stared at the signature line. Graham had signed Daniel into Brooks' care personally. Not years ago. 9 months ago. Every assumption collapsed inward at once. Graham had not simply covered up the past after Daniel disappeared. He had known Daniel was alive recently. Maybe still alive now. A sharp knock suddenly struck the apartment door again. Harder this time. Mrs. Lewis! The fake maintenance voice called through the hallway. We can unlock this the easy way or the hard way. Nathaniel folded the intake form instantly and slipped it inside his coat. Too late. A shadow passed beneath the gap under the door. Whoever stood outside had crouched low enough to see movement inside the apartment. Amara reacted first. Without asking permission, she darted toward the kitchen table and scattered old bills and grocery flyers across the surface where the document had been moments earlier. Then she grabbed the steaming kettle and tipped hot water into the sink loudly. "Grandma!" she shouted suddenly with startling realism. The soup burned again. Nathaniel understood immediately. Noise. Distraction. Ordinary life. The hallway outside went quiet for one uncertain second. The people at the door had expected fear, whispers, planning. Not a child complaining about soup. Nathaniel watched Amara carefully then. She was no longer simply noticing danger. She was shaping what danger saw when it looked back. The rhythm tightened again when Evelyn pointed weakly toward the bottom of the intake form, still hidden beneath Nathaniel's coat. "Read the transfer location," she whispered. Nathaniel unfolded the final section quickly. Destination facility. Brooks Care Long-Term Recovery Center. Lakeview Annex. Nathaniel's pulse slowed dangerously. He knew the building immediately. Not because he ran it. Because Brooks Care had quietly shut the facility down 4 months earlier after a supposed electrical fire damaged part of the wing. Publicly abandoned. Privately inaccessible. Yet someone had transferred Daniel there afterward. Then came the near exposure. The apartment doorknob suddenly twisted hard from the outside. Once, twice, metal scraping loudly against the lock. "Mr. Brooks?" The voice outside said calmly now, no longer pretending to be maintenance. "You're holding something that doesn't belong to you." Nathaniel stepped backward slowly, eyes locked on the transfer form in his hand. Because beneath Graham Whitlock's authorization signature sat one final line that changed the danger completely. Emergency contact notification restricted by request of patient. Requested by Daniel Brooks. The sentence at the bottom of the transfer form would not leave Nathaniel's mind. Requested by Daniel Brooks. Outside the apartment door, the strangers kept testing the handle in slow intervals. Metal scraping softly through the hallway like a clock counting down. But Nathaniel barely heard them anymore. Every clue from the last 3 days had begun rearranging itself into a different shape. Daniel's hidden transit map. The message warning Nathaniel not to sign anything. Celeste watching from a distance but never approaching Amara. The groceries. The hidden hospital transfer. None of it fit the story Nathaniel had been telling himself since the beginning. Not if Daniel had chosen secrecy himself. Amara noticed the shift before anyone else did. "You look mad at yourself," she whispered. Nathaniel looked down at her slowly. The child was right. Because for the first time, he realized the terrifying possibility was not that Daniel had been trapped somewhere against his will. The terrifying possibility was that Daniel had hidden himself from Nathaniel on purpose. The rhythm tightened sharply when Evelyn finally spoke from the recliner. "He made me promise," she said quietly. Nathaniel turned toward her immediately. "Promise what?" Evelyn's tired eyes filled with something heavier than fear. "Regret. That if you ever came looking," she whispered, "I wouldn't tell you until he was strong enough to survive being found." The emotional impact landed all at once. Every assumption flipped inside out. Nathaniel had spent years believing powerful people around him erased Daniel to protect the Brooks name. But Daniel himself had been helping maintain the disappearance. Not because he hated Nathaniel, because he feared what returning would cost Amara. Suddenly the hidden records, the fake names, even the emergency restriction on the hospital transfer meant something entirely different. Daniel had not been only a victim of the system. He had been hiding from the system Nathaniel built. Then came the first major shift. Amara quietly walked toward the couch and picked up Celeste's blue notebook again. This time she flipped directly to the back pages without hesitation. She kept opening here, Amara said softly. Nathaniel moved beside her. Folded into the final pocket was a small cassette tape labeled only with one date from 9 years earlier. No names. No explanation. Nathaniel stared at it while the knocking outside stopped completely. Silence again. Listening silence. Evelyn looked terrified the moment she saw the tape. No, she whispered immediately. Don't play that here. Nathaniel already understood why. Whatever was on the tape mattered enough for strangers to break into an apartment over it. The rhythm shifted harder when Amara suddenly tilted her head toward the apartment door. They left, she whispered. Nathaniel crossed quietly to the peephole. Empty hallway, but on the floor outside sat another envelope. This one thinner, cleaner, intentional. Nathaniel opened the door only long enough to snatch it before relocking everything behind him. Inside was a single typed sentence. You are asking the wrong question. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Beneath the sentence sat a photograph taken less than 24 hours earlier. Amara leaving school. Celeste standing across the street. And behind both of them, partially reflected in a parked car window, stood Graham Whitlock speaking calmly with Principal Harris. Not chasing the girl. Watching the woman watching the girl. Nathaniel stared at the image while another realization crawled slowly into place. Graham may not have been trying to find Amara before Nathaniel arrived. He may have been trying to find Celeste. Then came the second shift, quieter but far more dangerous. Nathaniel turned the photograph over slowly. On the back, written by hand in blue ink, were 6 words that drained the remaining color from Evelyn's face. Daniel never wanted the child hidden from you. Silence swallowed the apartment. Because if Daniel did not choose to keep Amara away from Nathaniel, then someone else had convinced everyone that he did. And somewhere inside Brooks' care, Daniel was still alive long enough to know the difference. Nathaniel grabbed the cassette tape, the transfer form, and Celeste's notebook all at once and shoved them into his coat before anyone could argue. We leave now, he said sharply. The softness that had slowly entered his voice around Amara was gone again, replaced by the hard precision of a man used to making impossible decisions under pressure. Outside the apartment windows, snow whipped sideways beneath the streetlights while distant sirens echoed somewhere downtown. Evelyn struggled to stand fully this time, one hand pressed against her chest. Nathaniel. If Daniel's alive inside Brooks' care, somebody already knows I'm close, he interrupted. Staying here is the worst thing we can do. The pace shifted immediately. Movement replaced shock. Nathaniel killed the remaining lights in the apartment while Amara hurried toward the hallway closet without being asked. She returned dragging an old rolling grocery cart with one crooked wheel. Nathaniel frowned. Why do we need that? Because people stare at rich men carrying boxes, she whispered. But they don't stare at old grocery carts. Nathaniel looked at her for half a second, then nodded once. Smart again. Too smart in ways children should never need to be. Together they packed quickly. Not valuables, papers, medication, the notebook, the tape. Evelyn's breathing grew tighter the longer she stood. Then came the first shift. Nathaniel's phone vibrated again. This time the number belonged to Brooks' Care Corporate Security. He answered immediately while helping Evelyn into her coat. Mr. Brooks, the woman on the line said carefully, someone accessed archived patient recovery files under your executive clearance 10 minutes ago. Nathaniel froze. That's impossible. Sir. The login came from inside your downtown office. Silence hit hard. Nathaniel had not been near his office since leaving the board meeting hours earlier. Someone was impersonating him now. Or someone inside Brooks' Care already had access powerful enough to move as him. Amara noticed the change in his face instantly. What happened? she asked quietly. Nathaniel lowered the phone slowly. Someone's cleaning records before I can reach them. The danger changed shape completely then. This was no longer about hiding one missing man. Someone was actively erasing evidence in real time. Nathaniel moved faster after that. He shoved the final documents into the grocery cart beneath old blankets and cereal boxes. Outside the apartment door, the hallway had gone silent again. Too silent. Fire escape, Nathaniel said. Evelyn nodded weakly. But before anyone moved, Amara suddenly crossed back toward the kitchen table. Nathaniel turned sharply. Amara! Wait! She grabbed the grocery receipt from Brooks Care Pharmacy and held it beside the hospital transfer form under the stove light. Her eyes narrowed. The handwriting's the same. Nathaniel stepped closer immediately. She pointed at the capital letters in both documents. Tiny hooks at the end of every R. Heavy pressure beneath every T. Not Graham's clean legal handwriting. Someone else's. Someone who handled medication purchases and patient transfers both. That means the same person moved Daniel and bought Grandma's medicine, Amara whispered. Nathaniel's pulse slowed dangerously. Not random corruption. Coordination. Careful. Personal. Then came the second shift. A sound echoed suddenly from the apartment hallway outside. Elevator doors opening. Low voices. More than two people now. Nathaniel moved instantly, guiding Evelyn toward the fire escape window at the back of the apartment. Snow blew hard through the cracked frame as he forced it upward. Cold air flooded inside. Amara climbed onto the radiator beneath the window first, then suddenly stopped moving altogether. Her eyes locked downward into the alley below. Mr. Brooks? Her voice came out thin. This time, afraid. Nathaniel looked down past her shoulder into the alley and felt his stomach drop. Two men in dark Brooks Care security jackets already stood beside the fire escape ladder waiting for them to come down. And between them, holding a blue notebook against her chest beneath the falling snow, stood Celeste Harper. Celeste Harper was crying. Not dramatically, not loudly, just silent tears slipping down her face while snow gathered across the shoulders of her cream-colored coat in the alley below. The two Brooks Care security men beside her stood stiff and alert, but neither touched her. That detail hit Amara first. They're watching her too, she whispered. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes through the blowing snow. One of the guards reached toward his earpiece impatiently, scanning the fire escape above them. But Celeste never looked up at the apartment window. She kept staring at the blue notebook pressed tightly against her chest like someone protecting the last thing they owned. Then came the shift that changed the balance instantly. Celeste spoke without raising her voice. Nathaniel, she called into the alley. If they see the tape, Daniel dies. The words cut through the snow harder than shouting could have. Nathaniel froze beside the open fire escape window. For the first time since this began, Celeste was not speaking in warnings or fragments. She was speaking like someone who knew exactly what was happening. The security guards exchanged a quick glance at the sentence. Tiny. Nervous. They had not expected her to say that aloud. Amara noticed immediately. They don't know everything, she whispered. Nathaniel looked down sharply. She was right again. The men downstairs were muscle, not planners, following instructions without the full picture. The emotional balance shifted all at once. Graham Whitlock was no longer the entire threat. Someone above him was compartmentalizing information, keeping even their own people partially blind. Then came the first major turn. One of the security men stepped forward suddenly. Mr. Brooks, we're trying to keep this contained. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Contained from who? The man hesitated. Fatal. Mistake. The board, he answered carefully. Not police. Not hospitals. The board. Nathaniel felt the ground move beneath the story again. This was bigger than one lawyer protecting an old family scandal. Brooks Care leadership itself was involved somehow. Years of silence, hidden records, fake identities, corporate containment. Celeste finally looked up toward the apartment window then, and the fear in her eyes no longer looked like guilt. It looked like exhaustion. Daniel didn't disappear because of the Brooks name, she shouted softly through the snow. He disappeared because he found something inside Brooks' care that people would bury families to protect. Silence hit hard after that. Even the guards looked unsettled now. Nathaniel's pulse slowed dangerously. Every assumption cracked wider open. This had never only been about race, shame, or family reputation. Daniel had seen something large enough to turn a hospital system into a machine built around secrecy. Then came the second shift. Amara suddenly leaned farther out the fire escape window, staring not at Celeste but at the older security guard beside her. "I know him," she whispered. Nathaniel frowned. "From where?" "The school." The guard stiffened instantly. "Too late." Amara pointed carefully. "He was sitting in the parking lot on Tuesday pretending to read a newspaper." Nathaniel looked back toward the man. Same stillness. Same controlled posture. Surveillance. Not random security response tonight. They had been near Amara for days before Nathaniel ever arrived. The older guard slowly removed his earpiece then, as if realizing the lie was already broken. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, "you need to hear the tape before anyone else does." Celeste stepped forward immediately. "No, not here." But the guard shook his head once. "It's too late for caution." Then he reached slowly into his coat pocket and removed a hospital ID badge Nathaniel recognized instantly. Executive Ethics Oversight Division. A department Brooks Care publicly dissolved 6 years earlier after a financial restructuring. Nathaniel stared at the badge while snow spiraled harder through the alley. Because Daniel had once worked in that exact division before he vanished. Then the older guard looked directly at Amara, not Nathaniel, and said the one sentence that changed the danger completely. "Your father left evidence somewhere no one rich enough would ever think to search." The first gunmetal gray SUV turned into the alley before Nathaniel could answer the guard's warning. Then a second one followed behind it, headlights washing across the falling snow in hard white beams. The two Brooks Care security men beside Celeste immediately stiffened, hands moving toward their earpieces at the exact same moment. Whatever balance existed seconds earlier collapsed instantly. "They found us," Celeste whispered. Nathaniel grabbed the fire escape railing so hard the cold metal bit into his palm. Above them, apartment windows flickered open as neighbors sensed movement below. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed through downtown Chicago traffic, growing louder instead of fading away. The alley had become a trap. Then came the first violent shift. The older security guard with the ethics oversight badge suddenly stepped backward away from the arriving SUVs instead of toward them. "Mr. Brooks," he said sharply, "those aren't corporate responders." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "Then who are they?" The guard looked genuinely afraid now. "Private contractors." The answer changed the danger immediately. Brooks Care had lawyers, investigators, internal security. But private contractors meant somebody operating outside official systems entirely. Somebody preparing for consequences no boardroom could survive. The SUV doors opened below. 4 men stepped out wearing plain dark jackets with no visible company insignia. One carried a slim black equipment case. Another scanned the fire escape windows directly with practiced eyes. Celeste backed away instinctively. "They're here for the tape," she whispered. Nathaniel's pulse slowed dangerously. Not Daniel. Not Amara. The tape. Which meant whatever Daniel recorded years ago mattered more than any single person in the alley tonight. Then came the second shift. Amara suddenly moved before any adult did. She climbed fully onto the fire escape railing despite the icy wind, and pointed toward the alley dumpster beside the brick wall below. "The red sticker," she whispered urgently. Nathaniel followed her line of sight. On the side of the dumpster sat a faded elementary school lunch sticker from South Haven. Tiny. Ordinary. Easy to ignore. But Amara remembered immediately. "That's where the janitor hides things kids aren't supposed to find," she said. The older guard's expression changed instantly. "Daniel," he breathed. Nathaniel looked sharply at him. The guard swallowed once. "Your son volunteered at South Haven after the ethics division shut down. He used dead drop spots with the maintenance staff when he thought people inside Brooks Care were tracking him." The entire story shifted again. Daniel had not simply vanished into hiding. He had been building secret communication routes right under ordinary life the entire time. The private contractors below began spreading through the alley now, boots crunching through snow. One of them looked directly upward toward the fire escape. Nathaniel moved immediately. Inside. Now. But Amara didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the dumpster sticker. No, she whispered. There's something still there. Before Nathaniel could stop her, she scrambled down the lower half of the icy fire escape ladder alone. Amara! Nathaniel lunged after her while Celeste shouted in panic below. The alley exploded into motion all at once. One contractor started toward the ladder. The older security guard intercepted him hard against the brick wall. Snow scattered violently beneath their feet. Nathaniel reached the final ladder section just as Amara dropped beside the dumpster and shoved her small hand into a rusted opening beneath the metal lid. For one horrifying second, nothing happened. Then her fingers closed around something hidden deep inside. A small waterproof cassette recorder wrapped in plastic grocery bags. Amara held it up through the falling snow just as one of the contractors shouted, "She found it!" Everything accelerated at once. Celeste grabbed Amara toward her chest while Nathaniel turned instinctively toward the recorder in the child's hand. Because taped across the front in Daniel's handwriting were 6 words that shattered the last stable assumption left in the story. If you're hearing this, someone inside the Brooks family helped me disappear. The cassette recorder was already playing before Nathaniel realized Amara had pressed the button. Static crackled violently through the snowy alley, while everyone froze for one impossible second around the sound of Daniel Brooks breathing into a microphone years earlier. If this recording survives, Daniel's voice said roughly, then somebody I trusted helped bury the truth. The sentence landed like shattered glass across the alley. Even the contractors stopped moving. Snow spiraled through the harsh SUV headlights while Nathaniel stared at the recorder in Amara's hands as if it might explode. Daniel sounded exhausted, older, but alive, real. I thought my father was the danger, the recording continued. I was wrong. Everything inside Nathaniel seemed to stop at once. For days, every fear, every hidden file, every warning had pointed toward the Brooks empire crushing Daniel to protect itself. But Daniel's own voice had just torn that assumption apart. Nathaniel was not the monster Daniel ran from. He had been manipulated into believing he was. Then came the first shift. The recording crackled again as Daniel coughed weakly somewhere far away in time. Someone inside Brooks' care wanted me isolated from my father because they needed him blind. Nathaniel's pulse slowed dangerously. Blind. Not angry. Not guilty. Blind. Suddenly, every strange detail snapped into terrible alignment. Graham watching Celeste instead of Amara. The fake maintenance workers. The erased hospital records. The monitoring devices in Evelyn's apartment. Somebody had spent years controlling information around Nathaniel specifically, shaping what he believed about his own son. Not simply hiding Daniel. Managing Nathaniel himself. Then the twist hit harder. The person helping me disappear, Daniel whispered through static, wasn't protecting me from the Brooks family. She was protecting me from Brooks' care. Celeste closed her eyes instantly. The alley shifted emotionally all at once. Not villain. Not manipulator. Protector. The woman everyone feared had spent years helping Daniel stay alive inside the very system hunting him. Amara noticed it before Nathaniel did. That's why she never came close to me, she whispered. She didn't want them seeing us together. The contractors moved suddenly then, snapping the alley back into danger. Take the recorder, one shouted. Nathaniel lunged forward immediately, but Amara reacted first. She shoved the cassette recorder into the crooked grocery cart beneath old blankets and cereal boxes, then kicked the cart hard beneath the fire escape stairs just as one contractor grabbed for her sleeve. Celeste intercepted him violently, slamming into his shoulder hard enough to throw both of them into the snowbank. The alley exploded into movement again. Nathaniel pulled Amara behind him while the older ethics division guard struggled with another contractor near the SUVs. Then came the near exposure. The annex! Amara shouted instinctively toward Nathaniel. That's where... She stopped herself too late. One of the contractors froze instantly and looked toward the others. Lakeview Annex, he barked sharply. Move now. Nathaniel felt cold realization cut through him. They hadn't known the location yet. Amara had almost exposed everything. The danger escalated beyond recovery in seconds. SUV engines roared alive. The contractors were no longer trying to recover evidence. They were racing toward Daniel. Nathaniel grabbed Amara's shoulders hard enough to steady her frightened eyes. Listen to me, he said sharply. From now on, nobody speaks names out loud unless I ask. Amara nodded instantly, guilt flashing across her face. But Nathaniel saw something else there too. Intelligence. Learning. Fast. Then the cassette recorder crackled again from beneath the grocery cart. Daniel's weakened voice returned through static one final time. If you're hearing this, Dad, there's one thing you still don't understand. Silence swallowed the alley despite the engines roaring around them. Nathaniel slowly reached toward the recorder while snow blew sideways beneath the city lights. Then Daniel whispered the sentence that shattered the last possible version of a simple ending forever. The person who ordered everything wasn't trying to destroy the Brooks family. They were trying to inherit it. The first time Nathaniel Brooks saw Graham Whitlock after everything changed, Graham was standing alone beneath the pale fluorescent lights of Brookscare's underground parking garage, holding an umbrella he did not need. Snow melted slowly along the concrete entrance ramps behind him while black SUVs idled quietly nearby. No raised voices. No guards rushing forward. Just two men who had spent 20 years building the same empire now looking at each other like strangers meeting at the edge of a grave. Nathaniel stepped out of the SUV slowly, coat dusted with snow, the cassette recorder hidden inside his pocket. Amara remained seated in the back beside Evelyn and Celeste, watching through the tinted glass. Graham's expression stayed calm in that careful lawyer way Nathaniel had trusted for decades. You should have called me first, Graham said softly. Nathaniel almost laughed at the normalness of the sentence. Would you have answered honestly? Graham adjusted the umbrella handle once. Tiny movement. Controlled. I've spent years protecting your family. Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. That's the problem, he said quietly. The tension did not explode between them. It deepened. Slow and crushing. Every word now carried years beneath it. Snow hissed softly against the garage entrance behind them while somewhere overhead hospital ventilation systems hummed through steel ducts. Then came the first shift. Graham's eyes drifted briefly toward the SUV windows. The child shouldn't be here. Nathaniel felt the warning hidden inside the sentence immediately. Not concern. Calculation. He stepped slightly sideways, blocking Graham's view into the vehicle. You've been watching her since before I arrived at the school. Graham's face remained unreadable. I watched situations, not children. The answer landed wrong in Nathaniel's chest because it sounded rehearsed. Prepared years ago for a conversation neither of them expected to survive. Then Graham lowered his voice. Daniel forced people into impossible choices. Nathaniel's pulse slowed dangerously. Did he? Graham hesitated half a second too long before answering. He found information that would have collapsed Brooks' care overnight. There it was. Not denial. Not outrage. Confirmation hidden inside justification. The rhythm shifted harder when the back SUV door suddenly opened behind Nathaniel. Amara climbed out before anyone stopped her. Celeste whispered sharply for her to stay inside, but Amara ignored her completely. Instead, she walked quietly across the garage floor, holding the old grocery receipt from Brooks Care Pharmacy in her hand. Graham's calm expression flickered for the first time. Tiny, but real. Amara stopped several feet away from him and tilted her head slightly. You already knew Grandma's medicine dosage, she said softly. Silence. Nathaniel turned sharply toward Graham. The little hooks at the end of every R. The same handwriting. The same pressure marks. Graham recovered instantly, but not fast enough. Amara had seen the truth first again. You bought her medicine, Nathaniel said quietly. Graham exhaled once through his nose. Keeping Evelyn stable was necessary. Necessary. Not kind. Not caring. The word changed everything emotionally. Then came the near exposure. Nathaniel's hand drifted unconsciously toward the cassette recorder hidden inside his coat pocket. Graham noticed the movement immediately. His eyes sharpened. What did Daniel leave you? The question hung dangerously between them. Nathaniel almost answered too fast. Almost revealed the tape before hearing everything. But Amara moved first again. She stepped directly between the two men and held up the folded pharmacy receipt instead. Why would somebody dangerous buy soup for my grandma? She asked quietly. Graham looked down at her for a long second. Not annoyed. Saddened. Almost guilty. And that frightened Nathaniel more than anger would have. Because guilty men still believed they were protecting something. Then the garage elevator doors opened behind Graham with a soft metallic chime. Everyone turned instinctively toward the sound. A thin man in hospital scrubs stepped out slowly, face pale beneath the fluorescent lights, carrying a clipboard against his chest. Nathaniel's breath stopped instantly, because the man wore Daniel Brooks's silver watch. Amara stepped toward the man in hospital scrubs before any adult could stop her. Nathaniel reached instinctively for her sleeve, but she slipped gently past his hand and crossed the concrete garage floor alone beneath the humming fluorescent lights. The man holding Daniel's silver watch looked startled the moment he saw her approaching, like someone watching a memory walk toward him in real life. Snowmelt dripped steadily from the parking ramp behind them while Graham Whitlock remained perfectly still beside the elevator doors, eyes unreadable again. Amara, Celeste whispered sharply from near the SUV, but Amara kept walking. The silver watch hanging loose from the stranger's wrist caught the pale overhead light exactly the way it had in her drawing from the first day. She stopped directly in front of him and tilted her head slightly. You knew my dad, she said softly. The man swallowed hard. Not denial, not surprise, guilt. Nathaniel felt the entire room tighten around that silence. Then came the first shift. The man slowly crouched to Amara's height and held out the clipboard in trembling hands. Your father asked me to keep this safe, he whispered. Nathaniel moved instantly, but Graham stepped sideways almost casually at the same moment, blocking part of the path between them without seeming to. Tiny movement, huge meaning. Amara noticed first. She looked not at Graham's face but at his shoes, turned slightly inward now, ready to move, ready to stop something. The child understood before Nathaniel did. The clipboard mattered more than the tape. Don't give it to him yet, Amara said quietly to the man in scrubs. The garage fell completely silent. Nathaniel stared at her in shock. Graham's eyes sharpened dangerously. Then the man in scrubs looked at Amara again and, incredibly, listened to her instead of the billionaire standing 10 feet away. Why? He whispered. Amara pointed slowly toward Graham's umbrella. Because he's holding it too tight. Nathaniel looked immediately. White knuckles around the umbrella handle. Not calm anymore. Fear leaking through. Control. The emotional balance shifted all at once. Graham Whitlock had been composed through threats, recordings, hidden hospitals, and surveillance. But this clipboard unsettled him, which meant it contained something no one else had yet seen. Then came the near exposure. One of the private contractors suddenly emerged from the far stairwell entrance holding a phone to his ear. They're tracing the recorder signal, he barked toward Graham. We need to move now. Nathaniel's pulse slowed dangerously. If the contractors realized the cassette recorder was still inside the SUV, everything would collapse before they understood the truth. He took one step toward the vehicle too quickly. Graham noticed immediately. Nathaniel, he said quietly. Whatever's in your pocket won't save him. Too close. Too observant. Nathaniel forced himself still again, but Amara reacted first. She suddenly tugged the man in scrubs gently by the sleeve and pointed toward the silver watch. My daddy scratched the back, she whispered. He said real things leave marks. The man's face broke completely then. With shaking fingers, he removed the watch and turned it over beneath the fluorescent light. Scratched into the metal backing were tiny uneven letters Nathaniel recognized instantly as Daniel's handwriting. Trust NO board vote after March. Nathaniel felt cold realization slam through him. Not family inheritance. Corporate control. Somebody inside Brookscare leadership had been planning something far larger than hiding one missing son. The man in scrubs looked up at Nathaniel with frightened eyes. Daniel found financial transfer records tied to patient trials, he whispered. Graham stepped forward instantly. Stop talking. But Amara moved before anyone else could. She snatched the clipboard from the man's trembling hands and ran straight toward Nathaniel. One contractor lunged after her across the wet concrete floor. For one terrible second, her sneakers slipped on melting snow. Nathaniel's heart nearly stopped. But Amara caught herself against the SUV door and shoved the clipboard into his hands just before the contractor grabbed her coat sleeve. Papers exploded partially loose. Across the garage floor beneath the fluorescent lights. And on the very top page, beside Brookscare executive signatures, sat a name none of them expected to see. Nathaniel Brooks. The papers sliding across the wet concrete floor finally connected everything. Hospital transfer authorizations, ethics division memos, patient trial funding reports, confidential board votes. Every hidden piece that had circled around Nathaniel and Amara for days now sat exposed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the Brookscare garage. Snowmelt soaked the pages while Nathaniel crouched slowly beside them, his pulse hammering in heavy silence. At the center of the scattered documents was the page that mattered most. A Brookscare executive authorization approving emergency transfers for non-compliant recovery patients into off-record facilities connected to private research funding. Nathaniel's signature sat near the bottom. Real signature. Real ink. But the approval date came from a weak Nathaniel had been in Geneva attending an international medical summit. Someone had used his authority while he was overseas. The emotional impact landed all at once. Not only had someone manipulated Nathaniel's beliefs for years, they had been using his own identity as cover for operations he never saw. Daniel had discovered it. And Daniel disappeared afterward. Then came the first shift. Graham Whitlock stopped pretending. His calm lawyer posture finally cracked as he stepped toward the papers scattered across the garage floor. You don't understand what happens if those become public, he said quietly. No denial anymore. No performance. Just exhaustion and fear. Nathaniel looked up slowly from the soaked documents. Then explain it to me. Graham exhaled once through his nose and glanced toward the waiting SUVs behind him. Brookscare isn't just hospitals anymore, he said softly. There are government contracts, pharmaceutical partnerships, research divisions you've never even seen. The sentence widened the danger instantly. The conspiracy was larger than greed, larger than inheritance. Entire systems beyond Nathaniel's control had rooted themselves inside the company carrying his family name. Amara stood very still beside the SUV, listening carefully while snow gathered in tiny white specks across her curls. Then she noticed something everyone else missed. One page had flipped upside down beneath the melting slush. She stepped forward and picked it up before anyone stopped her. Mr. Brooks, she whispered. Nathaniel turned sharply. The document in Amara's hands was older than the others. A Brookscare ethics oversight complaint filed 9 years earlier by Daniel Brooks himself. The attached witness list contained only 3 names. Daniel Brooks, Celeste Harper, Nathaniel Brooks. Nathaniel's breath caught instantly. He stared at the final name in disbelief. I never saw this, he whispered. Graham's silence answered before words did. Suddenly, every strange fracture in the story aligned completely. Daniel had tried to bring the evidence directly to his father years ago, but the complaint never reached him. Someone intercepted it before Nathaniel could even know his son was asking for help. Then came the escalation. Graham stepped closer, lowering his voice dangerously. Nathaniel, listen carefully. If those records surface publicly, Daniel won't be protected anymore. Nathaniel's eyes hardened. Protected from who? Graham looked toward the upper security cameras lining the garage ceiling. Tiny black lenses staring silently down at all of them. People who don't work for Brookscare, he answered quietly. Cold realization spread instantly through the garage. Even now, Graham was afraid of someone higher than himself. Someone invisible. Then the final shift struck harder than all the others. Amara carefully unfolded the last damp page attached to Daniel's complaint. A grainy photograph slid free beneath the fluorescent lights. Nathaniel recognized the room immediately, the Brooks Care executive boardroom from 9 years earlier. But it was not the room that stole the air from his lungs. It was the people inside it. Graham Whitlock, several senior executives, and standing near the back wall, partially turned away from the camera but unmistakable beneath the silver leaf lapel pin, was Nathaniel's younger brother, Edward Brooks. The brother Nathaniel, trusted with the company while he traveled overseas. The brother who inherited voting control of Brooks Care the same month Daniel vanished. Silence swallowed the garage whole, because suddenly the inheritance Daniel warned about no longer looked metaphorical at all. Edward Brooks arrived before anyone called him. The private elevator doors slid open at the far end of the garage, and Nathaniel's younger brother stepped into the fluorescent light wearing a charcoal overcoat still dusted with snow. No panic, no confusion, just quiet disappointment, like a man arriving late to a meeting he already knew the outcome of. That calmness shattered the room harder than shouting ever could. Graham lowered his eyes immediately. The contractors stepped back without being told. Even the security guards changed posture around Edward. Nathaniel understood everything from that single movement. This had never truly belonged to Graham Whitlock. Graham was only the wall standing in front of the real architect. Edward looked first at the wet documents scattered across the concrete floor, then at the cassette recorder resting near the SUV tire. Finally his eyes settled on Amara. "So this is Daniel's daughter," he said softly. Not surprised. Not emotional. Certain. Nathaniel felt something collapse inside his chest then. "You knew." Edward met his brother's stare without flinching. "For years." Silence swallowed the garage. Snow hissed faintly outside the entrance ramp while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like distant static. Nathaniel stepped closer slowly. "Daniel came to you first, didn't he?" Edward's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "He came to everyone who would listen." The answer landed heavier than denial. Then came the first shift. Nathaniel held up the old ethics division complaint with his own forged authorization attached. "You used my name." Edward glanced at the paper only briefly. "I used your absence." Nathaniel stared at him in disbelief. Edward finally looked tired for the first time all night. "You were always somewhere else, Nate. Conferences, investors, expansion deals." Daniel needed someone to stop what he found before Brooks Care collapsed. "So you erased him?" Nathaniel asked quietly. Edward's voice lowered. "I hid him." The emotional impact broke across the garage all at once. Not murder. Not simple greed. Something far uglier. Edward genuinely believed he had saved the company by sacrificing the truth. Graham finally spoke, voice cracking beneath years of loyalty and fear. The patient trials would have destroyed thousands of jobs overnight. Nathaniel turned sharply toward him. "And what did it destroy instead?" No one answered. Then Amara stepped forward. Small, silent, unafraid now in a way children should never have to become. She looked directly at Edward Brooks while holding Daniel's silver watch in both hands. "My daddy kept trying to come home," she whispered. Edward's face changed finally. Just for 1 second. Real pain breaking through strategy. Amara saw it immediately. "You told him my grandpa didn't want him anymore, didn't you?" The question hit with terrifying precision. Nathaniel turned slowly toward his brother. Suddenly every missing piece aligned perfectly. The fake signatures. The intercepted complaint. Daniel hiding from Nathaniel instead of reaching him directly. Edward had not needed chains or threats to isolate Daniel. He only needed to convince a wounded son that his father chose the company over him. Edward's silence became its own confession. Then came the second shift. Nathaniel looked down at the forged authorization pages still soaked with snowmelt at his feet. His own signature, his own company, his own blindness. And for the first time in years, winning no longer mattered to him. Not the board. Not Brooks Care. Not inheritance. None of it. He looked back at Edward into his without looking away from Edward. And for the first time that night, Edward Brooks lowered his eyes first. The first police cruiser arrived quietly. No sirens. Just blue lights washing softly across the concrete walls of the Brookscare garage while snow continued falling outside the entrance ramp. The private contractors who had moved like hunters only minutes earlier now stood separated against the wall beneath the watch of Chicago detectives and federal investigators from the Department of Health and Human Services. Phones rang everywhere at once. Lawyers appeared. Security badges were collected. And for the first time all night, nobody listened when Edward Brooks tried to give instructions. Nathaniel stood near the scattered documents in complete silence, while officers photographed the soaked papers one by one beneath portable floodlights. The forged authorizations, the hidden transfer orders, Daniel's ethics complaint. The evidence no longer belonged to whispers or family secrets. It had become official, real, irreversible. Then came the first shift. Graham Whitlock sat alone on a folding chair near the garage wall, shoulders bent forward as an investigator quietly read him his rights. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He only stared downward at melting snow water spreading slowly across the concrete beneath his shoes. Nathaniel watched him for a long moment before walking over. Graham looked up once, exhausted beyond words. "I kept telling myself I was buying time," he whispered. Nathaniel said nothing. Graham's eyes drifted toward Amara standing beside Celeste near the SUV. "Then the child kept showing up," he said softly. And suddenly all the lies started looking small. The emotional weight settled heavily between them. Nathaniel realized then that Graham had probably stopped believing in the cover-up long before tonight. Fear had simply lasted longer than courage. Then the rhythm shifted again. A paramedic carefully guided Evelyn onto a stretcher near the elevator lobby, wrapping warm blankets around her shoulders while she held Amara's hand tightly. Amara stayed beside her grandmother without being asked, calm in the strange way. Children become calm after surviving something too large too quickly. One detective approached Nathaniel holding the cassette recorder inside an evidence bag. "Your granddaughter's actions saved this case," the detective said quietly. Nathaniel glanced toward Amara immediately. Not daughter, not witness, family. The word hit him harder than everything else combined. Because none of this would have surfaced without the small decisions Amara kept making long before powerful adults finally told the truth. The grocery receipt, the hidden notebook, the watch engraving, the clipboard. She had seen the cracks first every single time. Then came the second shift. Edward Brooks finally stepped forward between two federal agents, expensive coat hanging open now against the cold garage air. He looked older suddenly, smaller. "Nathaniel," he said quietly. Nathaniel turned slowly toward his brother. Edward swallowed once before speaking again. "You think this fixes anything?" The question hung strangely in the air. Not cruel. Hollow. Nathaniel looked past him toward the massive Brookscare logo painted across the far garage wall. For years he had believed success meant growth, expansion, control. But Daniel had died piece by piece inside systems Nathaniel never stopped long enough to truly see. "No," Nathaniel answered softly. "It just means we finally stop pretending." Edward lowered his eyes again as agents led him toward the elevator. No dramatic collapse. No screaming innocence. Just the quiet destruction of a man who had spent too many years convincing himself survival mattered more than truth. Snow blew harder through the open garage entrance then, carrying cold air across the wet concrete floor. Amara suddenly stepped beside Nathaniel and slipped Daniel's silver watch into his hand without saying anything. Nathaniel stared down at the scratched metal backing beneath the fluorescent lights while investigators continued moving around them. Trust no board vote after March. Daniel had spent years trying to leave breadcrumbs back to his father. Nathaniel closed his hand slowly around the watch. Because even with the arrests beginning, one thing still remained unfinished. Somewhere inside Brookscare, Daniel Brooks was still alive. Nathaniel sat alone beside the hospital window long after sunrise turned the Chicago snow pale silver. The private family waiting room on the 7th floor of Brookscare had gone quiet hours ago. Reporters crowded the lower entrances. Lawyers moved through conference rooms downstairs. Federal investigators sealed entire wings of the building. But up here, above the noise, there was only the soft hum of heating vents and the distant rhythm of nurses' shoes crossing polished floors. Daniel's silver watch rested in Nathaniel's open palm. He had been staring at the scratched words on the back for nearly 20 minutes without realizing it. Trust no board vote after March. Such small letters for something that carried so many lost years inside it. Nathaniel leaned back slowly in the chair and closed his eyes for the first time all night. Not to sleep, just to stop moving. Across the hallway, through the cracked doorway of another waiting room, he could see Amara curled sideways beneath a hospital blanket with her head resting against Evelyn's shoulder. Celeste slept sitting upright nearby, still wearing yesterday's cream-colored coat. Nobody looked heroic anymore, just tired, human. Nathaniel watched the rise and fall of Amara's breathing for a long moment. Then he noticed something painfully simple. Even asleep, the little girl still held the blue notebook against her chest protectively, as if she thought letting go for 1 second might make everyone lose each other again. The realization settled into him quietly. For years, Nathaniel believed protection came from power. Lawyers, money, control, distance. But the only reason truth survived it all was because an 8-year-old girl refused to stop carrying small fragile things everyone richer and stronger kept dropping. The rhythm remained soft after that. Nathaniel stood and crossed silently to the coffee machine near the hallway wall. Burnt coffee smell drifted faintly through the empty corridor, while snow pressed white against the hospital windows beyond. He poured 1 cup automatically, then paused before adding sugar. Daniel used to take coffee black. After overnight study sessions in college. Nathaniel had forgotten that until now. Or maybe he had simply stopped noticing details once business became louder than people. A nurse passed quietly through the hallway pushing fresh linens. She smiled politely at Nathaniel before glancing toward the sleeping child in the waiting room. "Your granddaughter's brave," she whispered softly. Nathaniel looked back toward Amara again. Granddaughter. The word no longer startled him. It hurt in a different way now. Not sharp, deep, like grief finally making room for something gentler beside it. Then came the small shift that mattered more than everything else that night. Nathaniel noticed Amara's shoes sitting neatly beside the waiting room couch. Worn soles. One lace tied with mismatched string where the original had snapped. He stared at them longer than he meant to. Billion-dollar acquisitions. Private jets. International conferences. And somehow his granddaughter had been walking through Chicago winters with repaired shoelaces while strangers fought over the company carrying his name. Nathaniel lowered his eyes slowly. When he finally returned to the waiting room doorway, Amara had stirred half awake beneath the blanket. She blinked sleepily toward him without fear now. "Did they find my daddy yet?" she whispered. Nathaniel crouched beside her carefully. For a moment he could not answer. Not because he lacked words. Because he suddenly understood promises should feel heavy before you make them. Then he gently tucked the hospital blanket higher around her shoulders the way he used to do for Daniel during thunderstorms when he was little. "Not yet," he said quietly. "But I'm done letting other people decide what family means." Amara's tired eyes stayed on him for another second before drifting closed again. Nathaniel sat beside the waiting room window after that while snow continued falling over the city below. And sometime near morning, without calling lawyers or board members or investigators first, he finally reached into his coat pocket, removed his phone, and opened the Brooks Family Emergency Trust records. Nathaniel Brooks canceled the morning board meeting with a single signature. Not postponed. Not delegated. Canceled permanently. The notification went out to every Brooks Care executive at exactly 8:12 a.m., while snow still drifted softly across the city outside the hospital windows. In its place, Nathaniel authorized something nobody inside the company expected. Full emergency transfer of voting control into an independent medical ethics trust until the federal investigation finished. No speeches. No press conference. Just one quiet decision that stripped power away from the family name before anyone else could weaponize it again. Then he walked away from the executive conference floor without waiting for approval. The rhythm shifted the moment he stepped into the pediatric waiting lounge carrying a paper bag from the small hospital gift shop downstairs. Amara sat cross-legged near the window coloring absent-mindedly on the back of old medical forms while Evelyn slept nearby beneath warm blankets. Celeste had finally gone home to shower after nearly 2 days awake. Morning sunlight reflected softly off the snow outside, turning the whole room pale gold instead of gray. Nathaniel stopped when he noticed what Amara was drawing. A crooked little apartment kitchen. A kettle on the stove. 3 people standing around a table beneath one yellow light. Not the garage. Not the police. Not the money. That kitchen. The smallest moment in the entire story. "You forgot the toaster," Nathaniel said quietly before thinking. Amara looked up, surprised, then smiled for the first time since this began. "You remembered." The sentence hit him harder than any accusation ever had. Nathaniel crossed slowly to her chair and placed the paper bag gently on the table beside her crayons. "Open it." Amara peeked carefully inside. A new pair of winter boots. Thick socks folded neatly beneath them. And tucked beside the tissue paper sat a small silver thermos engraved with tiny forget-me-not flowers. The same flowers Daniel used to leave beside the piano bench as a boy. Amara touched the thermos carefully with both hands. "These are expensive," she whispered. Nathaniel crouched beside her chair. "So were the things I wasted money on before." Silence settled softly between them after that. Not uncomfortable, just real. Then came the second shift. Nathaniel removed one final envelope from inside his coat pocket and placed it carefully on the table. Unlike every hidden envelope that came before, this one carried no secrets, no warnings, just Amara's full name written neatly across the front in his own handwriting. Amara looked at him uncertainly before opening it slowly. Inside sat copies of amended Brooks family trust documents and temporary guardianship authorization forms signed that morning. Not ownership papers, not charity, family protections. Evelyn stirred awake quietly nearby as Amara's eyes moved slowly across the pages without fully understanding every legal word. Nathaniel finally spoke again, softer this time. "Nobody's going to move you around like paperwork ever again." Evelyn covered her mouth suddenly, tears filling her tired eyes. Amara looked back down at the documents, then at Nathaniel. "Does this mean you're staying?" she asked. Nathaniel did not answer right away. Instead, he noticed her old shoes still sitting beside the chair, the broken lace repaired with mismatched string exactly the way they had been the night everything began. Slowly, Nathaniel reached into the paper bag again and removed a fresh pair of dark blue shoelaces. He knelt carefully on the floor in front of her chair and replaced the broken lace himself while Amara watched in complete silence. No billionaire in Chicago had probably knelt on a hospital floor in a tailored wool coat that year. Nathaniel did not care. When he finished, he looked up at her with tired eyes that finally seemed honest. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I am." Outside the hospital windows, snow continued falling softly over Chicago while, somewhere deep inside Brookscare's recovery wing, a nurse quietly opened the door to room 214. 3 weeks later, the first thing Nathaniel Brooks learned about elementary school pickup lines was that nobody cared who owned a hospital network when it was raining. Parents crowded beneath umbrellas outside South Haven Elementary, while tires hissed through wet Chicago streets and children burst through the front doors wearing oversized backpacks and winter coats half-zipped in excitement. Nathaniel stood awkwardly near the curb holding a purple umbrella that Amara insisted was less depressing than black. His tailored coat still looked too expensive for the cracked sidewalk beneath his shoes. But this time he noticed things he once would have missed completely. The crossing guard rubbing warmth into her gloves between traffic breaks. The little boy sharing crackers with his younger sister under the awning. The teacher staying late to help a child zip a broken jacket. Small things. Human things. Then the school doors opened wider and Amara finally appeared. Her braids bounced as she ran down the wet front steps holding a construction paper project carefully against her chest to protect it from the rain. Nathaniel instinctively stepped forward before she even called his name. Not because he planned the movement, because somewhere along the way, waiting for her had started feeling natural. You came early, Amara said, slightly breathless. Nathaniel took her backpack automatically while she climbed beneath the umbrella beside him. I was told being late is how you miss important things. Amara smiled at that. They began walking slowly toward the black SUV parked across the street, but Nathaniel noticed her limping slightly after only a few steps. He crouched immediately beside her without thinking. What happened? Amara lifted one sneaker sheepishly. Mud covered the front lace completely. Recess soccer, she admitted. Nathaniel stared at the dark blue shoelaces he had tied for her in the hospital weeks earlier. Still holding. Something inside his chest tightened softly. Without hesitation, he knelt right there beside the puddled sidewalk and retied the loosened lace while rain tapped steadily against the umbrella overhead. Nearby parents glanced over briefly, then looked away again. To them, he was only a grandfather fixing a little girl's shoe in the rain. Nathaniel realized that mattered more to him than recognition ever had. Then came the quiet shift that stayed with him longest. Amara handed him the damp construction paper project she had protected all the way. Outside. We had to draw what home feels like, she explained. Nathaniel looked down carefully. Crayon lines curved across the page beneath glitter glue and crooked stars. A tiny apartment kitchen. A hospital room window. Snow falling outside Chicago buildings. And in the middle of the drawing stood 3 figures around a yellow-lit table beside a steaming kettle. One tall, one small, one older woman smiling in a chair. Nathaniel swallowed once before speaking. You remembered the toaster this time. Amara grinned. You remembered too. The rain softened around them after that. Somewhere downtown, federal investigations still moved through Brookscare records. Reporters still camped outside corporate offices. Daniel remained inside recovery treatment upstairs at the Lakeview Annex, improving slowly but not yet ready to come home completely. Some wounds still needed time before words could reach them safely. But for the first time in years, nobody was hiding him anymore. Nathaniel folded the drawing carefully instead of stuffing it into his coat pocket like paperwork. When they reached the SUV, Amara suddenly stopped beside the open door and looked back toward the crowded school entrance one last time. Mr. Brooks? She asked softly. Nathaniel turned toward her. Rainwater slid quietly from the edge of the purple umbrella between them. Amara reached for his hand the same way she had the night everything broke apart in the garage. Then she whispered the sentence that stayed with Nathaniel longer than any board meeting, confession, or courtroom ever would. I think people get lost when nobody keeps looking for them. And this time, before the city could swallow another person he loved, Nathaniel Brooks held on.